Welcome to The Yoga Voice, a podcast by Cityoga, School of Yoga and Health. Our guests discuss how the contemporary practice of this ancient art transforms the lives of individuals and communities in the Midwest and beyond. Cityoga has been a center for the practice of yoga and yoga teacher training since opening in 2002. Join us as we explore how yoga inspires and transforms.
Hello, and thank you all once again for tuning in to us here at the Yoga Voice. And today's conversation is a really amazing person that I felt really fortunate to have him on the show. He's the director of the Miami Life Center. He's an authorized ashtanga teacher. He conducts workshops throughout the Americas, Asia, Europe, and Australia. And actually, he'll be coming to Cityoga in the fall of 2020. Tim Feldmann. So Tim is coming at you. He's just an inspiring person to listen to as a long-time yoga practitioner and teacher. We talked a lot about really the sacred nature of our yoga practice and his various trips to Mysore and the teachings he's been able to absorb from many great teachers around the world and how he can deliver that teaching to his students, particularly down at their studio in Miami. He shares the space with his wife, Kino McGregor, who's been on the show as well. And it was really fun to just kind of delve into, what it means to embody this practice and living our yoga and having this interest in studying the sutras and the ancient texts. And we've talked a lot about that because we both have that in common, this desire of a thirst really for knowledge about yoga and the transformation of human beings through these simple practices that take discipline and take energy and effort. So we got into some deep areas, and then we had some lively conversation as well. So do enjoy this upcoming talk with Tim Feldmann on the Yoga Voice.
I can see it recording.
There it goes. All right, we're on. So welcome everyone to the Yoga Voice. Dave Sims here, your host today. And with me is Tim Feldmann. Welcome, Tim.
Thank you very much, Dave. A pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yes, it's awesome to have you. And we're, for our listening audience, we're doing this via Zoom due to the coronavirus, COVID-19, trying to be safe and still keep, the voice of the Yoga Voice out there. And I am excited to talk with Tim because we just had a little conversation earlier, but we haven't actually met. His wife Kino has been coming to Cityoga for I think I met her 10 years ago or so, and a lot of our students have ventured on down to his studio in Miami and had such amazing things to say and about him as a teacher. And of course, I've listened to Chat and Chai, the Miami Life podcast that Tim sometimes hosts along with Kino and some of their teachers and students there. And so I'm excited to, hear about your yoga journey. As a way to get started, I always like to ask this question. I know you have a vast experience in yoga, but what's really inspiring you about yoga today?
Well, today I sat down I just found on YouTube, literally today, I found some YouTube recordings with Ramaswamy. What is his name? Sviratsa, is that his the first name? Ramaswamy, who I followed some years. I have never gotten to practice with him. And there's some recordings where he goes over the Bhagavad Gita chapter by chapter. So I was listening to that today, and that gives me fire to get on the mat. These days, swinging the leg behind my head is not in itself so extremely interesting for me anymore. It was for maybe 10, 15 years. And but these days, I like to get it back there. I like to put in the work that it takes to get my leg back there on a continuous daily basis, because I find that it is so in line with the primary text, the scriptures like the Bhagavad Gita and the Yoga Sutras and so forth. And I really do find that what these gentlemen like Patanjali, they promise us, that I find I get an entry and a physical, experiential, yogic understanding of these very uplifting words that teachings that we find in these texts. I find I get my hands on it, I get a grip on it, I get to like somewhat understand that. So that gets me going today and these days.
Yeah, very cool. Well, I always like to, hear people's perspective on the present day, and and I've sensed when I've listened to you, do an interview or teach something on YouTube, that it really is a sacred practice. It seems to like you treat it like a very sacred practice, which I do as well. So
that's what I hear about you.
So for our listeners that may not be familiar with you, do you want to delve in, however far back you want to go, to your yoga journey, and kind of a little bit of what Tim was like before yoga, and then what drew you to the mat, and then what's kind of kept you there? How's it evolved? So
yeah. I have a question maybe before we start. Is this just my voice, or is this also my image? I'm trying to figure out how pretty should I like maintain my facial expressions here.
We're just going to do voice.
So much better.
Yeah. I just left the video on so we can see each other eye to eye. So yeah.
I understand. I will let down my hair then.
Let it all loose.
I started yoga because I kind of had to, because of a coincidence, because of an accident. When I was younger, early on in my teens, I figured out that dancing and theater and so forth was what I wanted to pursue. I went to a school in Holland. I'm from Denmark originally. I went to Holland and I joined a school there for contemporary dance, and I studied there for 4 years. And I danced with different dance companies and so forth. And at some moment very on in my projection of that in my career, I visited some friends in Venezuela, and they took me to a mountain called El Ávila. And I was a foolish kind of guy, reckless, didn't know what I was doing. And I fell over a ridge there, and I fell down very far. Broke a lot of bones, should have died, didn't. Took 2 years to rehabilitate. And then at that time when that happened, I just moved to New York. I took 2 years off to rehabilitate. The doctor said I wouldn't. And the state of Denmark, which has socialized medicine, offered me partial invalid pension and so forth. But I was kind of set on what I wanted to do with my life. I wanted to get back on stage. That was kind of like what I had in mind. And I managed to do that. 2 years later, I moved back to New York and I pursued where I left. But it was my body was pretty beat up. At some moment, through the dancing and through some good friends and teachers, I took a class at Jiva Mukti. And I walked in there, and first of all, I was practicing right in front, facing Willem Dafoe, who had just come out, I believe, that year with Wings of Desire, Wim Wenders' movie about Berlin. Mm-hmm. I think he was Lucifer, and some other stuff. Like Willem Dafoe was definitely my hero.
Yeah.
And other people that was very inspirational to me. And my body just really soaked up that practice, and I could feel my body was just yearning, almost like it was like a scream of finally you listen to me kind of thing from that practice there. So I kept going. And I kept practicing there. In those days, they were very, very Ashtanga based. All the teachers was going down to Eddie Stern, practicing with him every day.
Okay.
I moved back to Denmark, and 5 years down the road from here, I bumped into an Italian senior teacher. His name is Lino Miele. Mm-hmm. In those days, there was basically two Ashtangis in Europe. There was John Scott and Lino Miele, and I was lucky enough to bump into one of them. And that was even more amazing what I felt with the Ashtanga yoga there. And Lino Miele was such a masterful mover. So I was still working with dance and choreography. So looking at him, I thought, I don't even care if you do yoga or dance or whatever you do. I want to study with you because something is going on the way that you can practice, the way you can move your body. And he taught from the idea. It was kind of the old school. Those days, that was the word on the Ashtanga street. 99% practice, 1% theory. So he kind of taught that literally, like, don't read, don't just get to your mat, except, read Pattabhi Joy's book, Yoga Mala. And about 4 years later, he said to me, he pointed at one of Desikachar's book, and he said, "Did you read that?" Mm. And I threw my hands up and I said, "No, of course not." He said, "Read it." And then from then on,
The Heart of Yoga, was that book?
I think it was The Heart of Yoga, yes. Okay. And I loved it. Yeah. And from then on, I started to read. And Lino was always talking about Pattabhi Joyce, Guruji, as we called him in those days. And so it was clear for me that I had to go to Mysore and meet Pattabhi Joyce. But I was very scared of it because of all my injuries. Mm. So I thought I have to know yoga very well because this is a guru. You can't say no to an old-fashioned, grand Indian guru. So... But then after some years, then I started to go to Mysore. That was in 2003, 2004, something like that. And I've been going ever since. First practicing with Pattabhi Joyce, later with Sharat.
Okay, yeah.
That's kind of my projection.
Yeah. Well, so you really got into it back in the 90s when yoga was really taking off in America. And then you back to Europe. And was it taking off in Europe as well at that time?
When I bumped into Ashtanga yoga, that was in 99. There wasn't a lot of yoga around. Okay. Those days. You could definitely find it, but it wasn't super popular. Mm-hmm. And when I was practicing from 99, we were a small practice group that would get together and practice. And that was especially me and one other lady. And believe it or not, her name was Bendy from Denmark, Bendy Fagerby. And we would meet up most days and practice together in her little summer cottage, usually, just on the outskirts of the coast of Denmark. Mm-hmm. And sometimes with other people also. So we were a very small community, and then slowly it started to grow more and more. Yeah.
Well, so do you visit family and go back to Denmark regularly these days, or?
Yeah, I usually go about once a year, usually in the summertime when Miami, where I live now, is super hot and kind of a little bit too hot for a northerner like me. Uh-huh. Then I retreat to the old country where I can sustain the temperature a bit better.
That's nice. Yeah, I have my daughter's going to school. She's in school in Scotland. She's doing her 4-year undergrad there, so she's halfway through. Sheltering.
Lucky you.
Yeah, it's a good excuse to go visit. But I think it was last summer or last fall, she went to Copenhagen to go like a weekend because college kids exploring places. And she loved
and it takes an hour, and you can, if you get like one of those cheap tickets, then you can go there for, I don't know, $50 or something.
Oh, easy. Yeah. And that's kind of right up there where, so Audrey's over in St. Andrews in Scotland. And then I have a daughter-in-law that's from Estonia. And so there's a lot of travel back and forth there with my kids and all that. So
those are some beautiful places. Estonia, Tallinn is absolutely stunning and lovely people. And I had the privilege of visiting, touristing a little bit, and teaching around Edinburgh, Inverness, and Scotland last year.
Oh,
loved it. Have you gone, Dave? Have you been over there yet?
Yeah. I've been to Scotland about 3 times, and toured right around there. So my mother's maiden name is McFarland. So,
there you go.
So we were, very, very strong Scottish roots. And first time I went over, I took my daughter to get her moved in freshman year. And we just, drove around sort of heading up through part of the Highlands and to the lochs. And there's a McFarland Castle ruins on this little teeny island out in the middle of this Loch Lomond, which is one of the larger lochs over there. And a fun fact is that there used to be a neighboring castle just a little ways down the shoreline that was the McGregor's castle.
That's fun. So did you go back to reclaim it, your castle there?
Yeah. We just, it felt, it was kind of weird to put your feet on the ground and touch the stones so that was fun. And it was fun, driving a boat out on the lake and hearing the local stories about the some of that old history and stuff. So anyway, but yeah, and it's interesting. When my daughter first visited her school there to see if she was going to go, she said she felt like she was coming home, and she has red hair, and she looks like she could have been born there. So anyway,
yeah.
But I bring that up when I was there and practicing yoga. That it seemed like there was quite a bit of ashtanga floating around, and anyway, so that. It seems like there's still a pretty good ashtanga influence in the UK. I don't know. So
I'd say very much so. There's also some really truly wonderful yogi aspirants, some ashtangis there, like Hamish Hendry from London, and Joey Miles up in Leeds, and Sarah Miles down in Brighton Beach, and so forth, and many more. There's some really, people that has the heart in the right place and is able to guide people very well. Mm-hmm. So I would be surprised if not. When there's a good thing happening, some people, they will realize and they will flock, luckily.
Yeah. Well, and that, now, do you still go to Mysore every year to study? Yeah,
pretty much. Yeah.
I had Taylor Hunt on the show not too long ago, and he said he had recently gone, and he was really intrigued by the new space that E-RYT has opened up, and then he said it was just an amazing. He went there with a little apprehension because of change, and then found that it was just like, wow, really transformative. Have you been to the new space over there yet?
So he just opened that new space in January this year, and we were supposed to go there, my wife Kino and I, but we have this amazing project that we started up. We bought an old factory, an old warehouse, a huge old worn down piece of brick that we are trying to beat into shape. So we had to cancel our trip and and focus on that. So I have not been there, but I've heard the same thing as you, that the new, even though it's like 20 minutes from Gokulam, where the old shala is, or the new shala it was called at that time, the main shala. It's 20 minutes by some kind of, mechanical transportation outside of Gokulam, that people really like the new space. It's much more organized, it's much more airy, and so forth.
Yeah,
I've heard the same.
So tell me about this building you guys are working on. What's that project? Is that going to be a new home for Miami Life, or what is it?
Yeah, that's a good question. We've been looking around, and Kino has this online yoga channel, Netflix for yoga, as she calls it, called Om Stars. And she's been looking for a place where she can have a decent filming facility, because she's spending a fair bit of money on renting all the time.
Yeah.
So that's that. And then we were talking about if it was possible to restructure the shala that we have so she could film there and we could have classes there. And it never really worked. So long story short, we started looking around, more kind of like just to figure out for fun what was possible and so forth. And we bumped into this building before it hit the market, before it got on the market. And we'd actually seen it before. I stopped the car one day when we were out for coffee on a Sunday, and I said, check out that building. Imagine if we could move Miami Life Center Om Stars into that building. And lo and behold, suddenly there's a realtor that shows us that building and says it's not on the market yet, but I might be able to talk the owner into selling you this building. And we walked in and just completely love it. But don't get me wrong, it needs a handyman or two in there, to say the least.
Yeah. Well, so my wife is she had wanted to move her practice. She's a family physician, and she wanted to move her out of a medical building where she was with a group of doctors and have her own space where she could, have a garden out there, and she could have yoga and meditation, so that, because she, has always practiced, Western medicine with a slant towards some of the Eastern flavor of things for healing and like yoga and things like that. And it was a building we drove by, many times and looked at, and it actually had been an old church, and then it had been like a Pilates studio for like 10 years. And then someone had it briefly to try to do yoga and Pilates. And one day we drove by and it was for sale. And we were kind of competitively bidding with somebody else that was wanting to put a dog kennel in it. And
no.
So the neighborhood kind of is in a residential area, and then it kind of rallied around, like, we'd much rather have yoga there than a lot of dog barking all the time. And so then became the rehab process, because it was still kind of had carpet from the 70s, and it was a major renovation. So that it's been open about 4 years now. So, and we kind of set a little Cityoga satellite studio there to offer some. So I understand like what's coming.
We are in the middle of the construction. Actually, sounds exactly the same story there, except we didn't have to competitively bid with a dog owner. But we're in the middle, and we're actually trying to do something just like that. We're trying to create not only a yoga studio and a filming studio, but create some kind of, at the moment we call it the educational facility, like an educational institution And we're trying to figure out what goes in there. But we are talking with some artists about maybe having artist residencies in there. Mm-hmm. We are talking with a really good friend of ours who is a traditional Chinese practitioner, medicine practitioner, about having such a program in there. We will be 2 yoga studios in there because it's a really big building. Will be Miami Life Center focusing on traditional ashtanga yoga, and will be what's called Windwood Yoga, which will come in and do more eclectic different kind of hatha yoga and hot yoga and things like that. Uh-huh. And then we want to do like more events, try to figure out what kind of events is good for the community and good for the ashtangis and for the yogis and so forth. So we're trying to open up the box a little bit with this thing.
Yeah. Well, that's really cool. And I'm like happy to hear that, because I know when you talk about the ashtanga community and the yoga community and sort of a bringing together and I don't know if it's what the word is, maybe just sort of like a collaboration. It's not, I mean, when I look at your schedule down at Miami Life, and I know it's traditional ashtanga and with a lot of Mysore and, lead, half primary, all that. But you've worked in some yen restorative, and then, I've seen prenatal and kids yoga and meditation and those things popping up. That how does that whole center evolve from where it began to where like you're heading now with a building potentially to open, have 2 studios, attracting different yogis, but under one roof?
When I started Ashtanga Yoga, I started out with that method as per Krishnamacharya and Pattabhi Jois, that kind of Ashtanga Yoga, because I thought it was so special. And I still really find it very special, and I find my preferred type of Hatha Yoga, of asana practice. But it is just basically Patanjali's Ashtanga Yoga. It is just basically what we call classic yoga. And classic yoga is not necessarily differentiating between, whether you jump through between your asanas or whether you don't. Classic yoga, traditional yoga, is interested in whether we are moving towards uplifting ourselves instead of degrading ourselves, we could say. Mm-hmm. That we take choices in the direction where we become better human beings, or we take choices that is more useful to our own fulfillment as people, as human beings, rather than falling into taking choices which seems to be to our benefit, but long term it's not at all. And to practice this type of classic yoga, or Raja Yoga as we call it, mm-hmm. Classic yoga or Ashtanga yoga, that doesn't matter really if we do the vinyasa, the Ashtanga vinyasa method, or if we do the yin method, or if we do whatever method that we do. And what I like about the teachers at Miami Life Center is they're so well educated. They go to India, many of them are authorized from Sharat and so forth, and they keep a curious mind about real yoga. And therefore they are able to teach to the student that walks in the door. At least I like to tell myself that. Yeah. And so even though our personally preferred method to classic yoga is as per Pattabhi Jois, and therefore we include vinyasas between our asanas, and we follow a particular sequence, that doesn't mean that we cannot teach classic yoga tapping into everything we know in a slightly different modality. Mm-hmm. So if I can be totally honest with you, I almost don't see a difference. I just see like what are people inspired to do? Like, do they like cheese, or do they like sweets, or what do they like, and then according to what they are gravitating towards, we offer some modalities of asana practice and lectures in philosophy and anatomy and so forth, which hopefully will be to benefit for a grand majority of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
It's a long speech about a simple question.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like in-depth answers, well, and I think it's I mean, you've been in the yoga world much longer than I have. I mean, you talked about going to Mysore in 2003 or 4, and that's really when I first encountered yoga. And it was several years later that I developed a daily practice, and there wasn't really much ashtanga in Indianapolis at the time. There were some studios doing kind of David Swenson's short form with music in a hot room, and that was my introduction to ashtanga, and I liked it.
That's pretty much what I did at Jivamukti.
Yeah, exactly, right. So, and then and I started, teaching yoga and doing this and that, and I ended up buying Cityoga, and they had some traditional ashtanga going on there. And I remember somebody asked me to sub a class, and because I'm like, oh yeah, I've taught ashtanga before, and I was thinking of a different, it wasn't traditional, and so everybody's like, well, basically just take them through. It was kind of a hybrid Mysore. It was like take them through like the primary series. I'm like, okay, so I better, that week before I thought, well, I better kind of study up on the primary series because it wasn't my daily practice at the time. And so I get out like a David Swenson video of the full primary, and I was like, shit. I'm so in over my head here. And so anyway, I went to the class, and I'm like, hey, you guys, I'm really not qualified to teach this, but I don't want you guys to have to miss out on your practice. So I can get you through about half of it that I know, and you're kind of on your own for the rest. If you need help, and want me to assist you, let me know. But I'm going to let you make that call. And it was a great group. It was like 20 people, and some very new people that could really help, and some seasoned practitioners that were, they were just kind of fine doing their own practice without. So it wasn't a led class. It was more of a Mysore style practice. And it was only 90-minute class. So anyway, that was.
It sounds to me that you guys were in it together. You were trying to learn to teach, and they were trying to learn to practice. And that's like as a practitioner, when you stand next to a transparent, honest person, teacher with integrity and compassion and willingness to do what it takes, man, isn't that just what we want?
Yeah, it really is, and the thing that always kind of perplexes me a little bit about ashtanga is is this kind of question that goes through my mind periodically. Is like, because I've tried to support like a morning in Mysore and really kind of have a good ashtanga community, and it kind of bubbles up and it kind of plateaus, and like Kino will come through, or another ashtanga teacher will come through, and I'll gain a little enthusiasm, and then when I visit around other places and look at what studios are doing, and it seems, I don't know how to say this, it seems like I hate to use the word successful, but maybe say like the larger ashtanga programs seem to be personality driven, where there's like a Kino and Tim, or there's like a Taylor, or there's like Hamish, or, there's these people that have great passion for the practice, but they also have a pretty strong personality that if you took them out of the equation, the community there would be a sort of gaping hole in the community. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
I don't know. So part of me thinks, well, we need a teacher with a strong personality to drive the program, but that's not what we're more about. It's community and having, I don't know where I was going with that. Other than that, I love.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah. Is that?
I think I do at least. Yeah. No, you're talking about charisma. Mm-hmm. You're talking about there's a person with great charisma. When you find a person with great charisma, those are the guys that becomes rock stars and movie stars and famous, or that they are able to round people up easier. So of course that is a big help if there's a person with charisma that takes up a particular yoga, they're more likely to get a flock around them. But I think that there's different ways of being very inspirational, and one is somewhat of a charismatic personality. But I think that there is there's also content based. Mm-hmm. And I think if you happen to have both, if you really know your stuff, I think a lot of people will recognize that. If you know your stuff and you're able to communicate it, that's something else that needs to be there, of course. Then people will recognize that. A lot of people will recognize that, and they will come. And I think Ashtanga is somewhat, part of it is so nerdy by nature in itself. So the people that are attracted to Ashtanga yoga, they will go there. Mm-hmm. I find that what you're talking about also is how to hold the space. I think that definitely need to be someone that holds the space, and that person needs to really have a strong fire for the subject. Ashtanga yoga it requires lots of discipline. It's not for everybody. It is considerable work. In my own opinion, I feel that it pays off tenfold. But so there needs to be someone that can truly hold the space. There needs to be someone that has the fire and can lit the fire around them for people that comes in. Mm-hmm. And I think that has a lot to do with the dedication. You called it sacredness a little bit earlier. The commitment, the benefits that this person has personally found in the practice. Now throw charisma on top of that, and you got a star teacher.
Right.
But I think it is really possible to have teachers that are not necessarily, Brad Pitt or Angelina Jolie, to get the message across. I really do think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's good to hear, and I sense that. I mean, we have the young lady running our early morning Mysore has just a huge amount of passion for the practice, and she's gone to India and gone to Mysore, and so she's very has the discipline, has the integrity, has the passion, and you can just tell her heart is all in. And then and she's done a great job. It's growing. She's been teaching. She's been the second year of her leading the morning Mysore, and it keeps growing. And then we have another teacher that she's been down to Carol has been down to Miami Life Center multiple times. She has some family down there, but she's been teaching. She was really one of the first Ashtanga teachers in Indianapolis, 20 years ago. And she's just such a sweet human being. And she teaches I almost want to say almost a hybrid kind of Mysore class. 'Cause it's and she does some lead primary, and she has a great following. She's had students that she's had for years, and she has an assistant when her classes get big, and it's very very great teacher, helping people advance their practice. She has a really strong, committed daily practice. And but she doesn't do the early mornings. She does later in the day classes and some evening led. And then we have our early morning teacher. And then we recently have another teacher that was doing a lead half primary. And she had been teaching in Hawaii and studied with Tim Miller,
Nancy Gilgoff in Hawaii, maybe.
Yeah, and
Tim Miller.
Yeah, Tim Miller and some
good people.
Yeah, so she has a really strong practice, and so it's kind of growing. So by the time you come to Indy in the fall,
you're gonna be exploding before that. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, we have
gonna walk into the middle of all that.
Yeah, well, this year has been like a sort of little trifecta on our schedule, because we just had Taylor, and then Kino is coming early in the fall, and you're coming later in the fall. So I feel like the community's going to get a treat back to back to back.
We hope so. If I can just go back to the Carol and that other lady you were talking about. So I really find that, how we say that the first necessity for a yoga teacher is compassion, and afterwards it's skill. Mm. I really feel that, first of all, we meet as human beings, like in any moment, anywhere, in any situation. And after that, that's when we start to consider what are we going to do together. First, we meet up and we figure out if we have someone in front of us that we can put our trust in a little bit or a lot. Mm-hmm. And then as soon as we have that established, then we can move on. And I don't think that maybe a charismatic person is not necessarily the most trustworthy person.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Depend on how ego-centered that charisma floats from. Mm-hmm. And you have someone like the first lady you were talking about, who is a sincere sadhaka, a sincere yogi aspirant that is in there because of probably some previous pain, and now is finding relief in this. I think that's the way to go. Mm-hmm. I think people recognize that if they have a little bit of connection to their own pleasures and pains in their life, that is to be recognized, and also that is to be appreciated and preferred, I'd say, in the yoga community. And it sounds like you got the right people there.
Yeah, we just need to get our space open back up.
Yes. Oh man. Yeah, but hopefully, you can open it up early enough so you got your stuff ready for when I come.
Yeah.
I'm just joking.
Yeah. Well, so here's some fun stuff. We have one of our staff. She is a graphic designer by her training, and so she's painting this beautiful mandala on the wall in our lobby.
Wow.
And to just to kind of help keep some people busy.
Keep some light.
We're painting the walls. We're just doing a little maintenance on the building inside.
Now is the time.
Yeah, so let's paint the rooms because nobody's in there.
Yes.
We filmed some classes there, kind of one person at a time in the building kind of thing. But yeah, we're who knows when the shelter in place or stay at home orders will be lifted, but we're live streaming 40 classes a week, and
and how are your students taking to it? Are they finding you and they're coming to practice online with you?
Yeah, they're definitely. So because we've been a studio for so long, for 18 years.
Wow.
And I've only been there 10, but there's students that have just, been there for year after year, and they're coming to online classes. And then we're finding students that had moved away are coming to the classes too, which is super cool. We have, a young lady who's she's teaching English in South Korea. She's been locked in, and we have another actually pretty dedicated ashtangi, Stephanie, who's been in Thailand and Southeast Asia for about 2 years, and she's been coming into the classes. So we're seeing, some of the classes are bigger online than they were, but there's fewer of them. So it's, it's a bigger class on a schedule of 40 versus when we had a schedule of 70, in person.
I understand. But it sounds like you made a reasonable transition. Congratulations. I'm sure that hasn't been easy.
Yeah. No. How are you guys? Well, this is a good little segue into what you guys are doing. Looks like the online intensives and the online schedule is pretty big down there. How's that going?
There's a good expression. It's called to throw paint on the wall and see if it sticks. That's kind of what we're trying to do. And it's been 2.5, 3 weeks now since we started to put an online schedule up. The first week, about the first 10 days, we just filmed a bunch of classes and threw them up for free on YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still there. And then after that, I started as, I feel I have a responsibility to my teachers to try to give them a little bit of income. Some of them are single moms and stuff like that. They literally do not have any other means. So we are. So now we have a full schedule up, also with classes online, and then we now started to put some workshops up, and that's going pretty good. I put one workshop up, a 1 week workshop here in April, and that sold out in 3 hours. That's crazy. And then I put another one in, and that sold out in 12 hours. And then I just put another one in that sold in another 12 hours. And I'm just going to keep sticking those things on there. If people want to come and practice me in that format, I'm super happy. And it means that I can put some money back into the yoga studio, and I can maybe meet some new and old people that I know from before. Mm-hmm. And exactly what you're saying is happening. People that moved away I haven't seen for a long time, they're now finding me there, and new people also. Mm-hmm. As a matter of fact, one of our oldest teachers, one of our most popular teachers, she just moved away from Miami. She moved to Charleston, North Carolina. And she was so unhappy, and we were so sad that she was leaving the schedule. And as soon as she moved up there here 1st of April, now I put her back on the schedule because of the whole thing. It's so funny. Alexandra is her name, Alexandra Santos.
Oh, that's very cool. Well, I saw those, and I must have lucked out because I signed up for one of your 5-day intensive things.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. I think it's in... it's in May or June. I don't know.
Yes, I have some in April. I just sold one out from the 1st to the 5th of June. Is that maybe when you're there?
That's probably the one. Yeah, that sounds right.
All right. I'll look forward to that, Dave. I'll try to kick your butt as much as I can, man.
yeah.
Over line.
Yeah, I have to get. My practice is a work in progress, right?
Yeah. So is my teaching. Don't worry.
Right.
It's funny. I have this photo shoot from a couple of years ago, and I have a certain amount of asanas that I did that day. And I'm looking at how quick these workshops sells out, and I'm just putting another photo up with the same text. And I'm thinking, okay, so, I have 9 more photos left from that series, so I can do 9. After that, I'm out of material. Then I can't teach anymore.
Yeah, that's good. That's good. Well, so I came into yoga through meditation, and
What kind of meditation, Dave?
well, I started out in actually I started out in 12-step recovery, and they just have like a general, one of the steps is sought through prayer and meditation. So
12 steps, that seems to me to be Patanjali in action right there.
Oh, totally. And so it's really, I kind of stumbled into a mindfulness style of meditation. And this was back in the 80s, early 80s. And then I've always been a seeker. So I've lots of different meditations I've explored and some of the, and even like back then when they had flotation tanks, the float tank.
Yes.
Yeah, they were kind of making a little splash back then, pardon the pun.
I remember.
And so I was doing that and meditating. It's just trying to, this inward journey. And then, so I really developed that daily practice then and stuck with it. Got into a lot of like running and triathlons and adventure races and physical. So I had this need for physical. And then I found yoga, and then I came into yoga. It's like, okay, know nothing about yoga. And somebody recommended, I was training for a marathon. They're like, oh, the stretching, yoga would be good for you. So, I went in and immediately the first class, I knew there was like a meditative component to this. There was more of a sacred feel to it. And and
you could recognize that because you came in with all your previous meditation, mindfulness training. So you could pick that out like a needle in a haystack.
Yeah. So that is what I'm intrigued about you is your study of the sutras and the seems like the philosophy and the sort of the bigger picture of yoga beyond asana. And although one of my favorite commentaries on the sutras is one you've mentioned in Satyananda.
Lovely one.
And yes. I lead a teacher training with a lady named Marcia Pappas, who she studied with him when he was still alive, and that's what she went to his ashram for her teacher training back before we had any yoga studios in Indiana, and so anyway, I have a love for history and philosophy, and it seems like you have a strong interest in that. How did that kind of evolve in yourself from dancing, movement guy to, Jivamukti and yoga and India, and where did that sutra study and philosophy come in?
It's a good question. I don't think there's like a particular turning point, like eureka moment where I went, I think it just came little by little. At first I was like you, I was just interested in the physicalities. I looked in Lino Millie's book of the first and the second series, and I was a dancer interested in the creative part of movement development, movement creation. And I looked in that book and I thought, man, that's some crazy moves these guys got, So, and I, first time when I started to go to India, first with Lino, I applied for an artistic research grant and got it. That's how I could go to India in my first time. And I learned the primary series with Lino there, and I came back and I made a solo, like a 15-minute solo based on the primary series. Now, Dave, I don't think that you at all would be able to notice that, but I know what's what. It's a long time ago. But so that's that. But slowly, I think that getting on my mat, I would say from the beginning, but slowly some of the most subtle experiences that came through on the mat started to ring louder to me. Like, why am I, what is this yearning. What is this question inside of me, or this like calling for forgiveness that I'm experienced from who? What did I do? It's kind of abstract because it's not tied on to someone particularly. Like that was one of the early ones. Later, it's like, some of those little bit more mystical experience where you're like, what the heck was that, man? Yeah. And also just the general, in those days, Pattabhi Jois, up until a couple of years ago when we all learned that he had a hard time keeping his hands to himself, which threw me for a strong loop recently. But before that, I looked at Pattabhi Jois as a very evolved human being, and an inspiration and a role model, someone I could look up to. And I was definitely feeling that I could use some improvement, on this the 1966 model, and I was starting to be more and more interested in that, and I found that the yoga practice was grinding down my rough edges in many ways. If you ask my wife, certainly not all of them. So sure, no, I'm just kidding, right? But so I started to be interested in what is it that's going on for me? I feel there's a change in me, and I like this new person better than the old person. And in my mind, it is very much instigated by yoga, by my practice of yoga. So how does that all work? And then I started to take some workshops and some lectures with Western teachers, and I always felt that somehow that there was a projection of self into the material, into the teachings, and I felt, that doesn't seem like that's what this particular shloka, this particular verse says. How do they come to that conclusion? And at some moment, I was lucky enough in India to run into a teacher, a retired professor from the Sanskrit University in Mysore, a very highly esteemed man, who is truly educated and truly knowledgeable. And I took one class with him, and his humbleness together with his clarity and his down-to-earthness made me, after that one class, a group class, I asked him, can I study more with you, and how do I do that? Can I study with you privately? And he said, come to my house and let's talk. And then he took me on as a private student, and I started to study Patanjali with him, Yoga Sutras with him, and there were so many things that I didn't understand. And at some moment I realized that Patanjali is drawing upon other traditions, such as the Sankhya Darshana and the Vedantic tradition. So then I started to study that so I could understand what the heck it was that Patanjali was saying. Yeah. And then began to study some of the Upanishads and a little bit the Gita and some more kind of obscure texts, comparative texts, under his guidance. And he was the driving force in deciding what it was that I should study. So I felt like I was in amazing hands, and I felt that for the first time this man seems to be able to make me comprehend, which is not an easy task. And second of all, I just felt, who am I to judge? But I just felt that his delivery had a purity to it that I fell in love with. To be honest with you, I fell in love with this 74-year-old professor. My heart was like beating for this man. My wife was getting jealous now. She was not. Yeah, but and it's kind of still is. I just feel that he is the definition of a true friend that wants the best for you, who's not that doesn't have a second agenda. And in the meeting with this man, and I began to wrap my head a little bit around the sutras. And I think that was a pivoting point for me to begin more and more to look to these texts for answers when I had existential questions in my life. Or just simple questions. So I would study with him, and I would go out on the streets, and I would be in some event or some situation with, the barista, my wife, or a yoga teacher, or a student, or my parents, or something. And there would be a conflict, and suddenly I felt like I was understanding a little bit more about the grammar, the underlying predicament for this conflict, simply because I could relate it to some of the sutras, some of the verses in the Yoga Sutras, some of the stuff that I learned. And now that was just a huge turn on for me. I said in our world, I felt that I started to understand a little bit more about this crazy wild world we live in, and my own reactions, and therefore other people's reactions and so forth. And that's still really what drives me. Yeah. And when I go to my mat and I am discouraged and it's too early and my body's stiff and I ate too much last night and I would much rather, go to the beach or something, then I know that when I do my asana practice, there's a part of my body and my mind and my heart that opens up and becomes transparent to let this deep knowledge flow in towards a deeper center in me, and I start to encompass, start to embody that material more. And that's why I practice, and that's why I accept, as we spoke about from the beginning today, that's why I accept the hardship of putting the leg behind my head, so jumping back, or learning a new asana, or not learning a new asana.
Yeah. Well,
does it make sense?
Yeah, that's so beautifully said. And that, as you were finishing that up, it made me think about the beauty of studying the sutras and the philosophy and the other different ancient texts, which I love. I love getting into that. And and I'm jealous that you have found this teacher. Yes. Because we use.
I would be jealous too.
Well, since we use Desikachar's book in our teacher training, and we
wonderful man
teach that twice a year, like 21 weeks each go. So I read that book twice a year, and over and over. And in the margins, he'll refer to other sort of obscure texts that maybe Krishnamacharya had referenced, and and this philosophy says this, and the sutras say this, or the Hatha Yoga Pradipika has contradictions, and it wasn't saying this is right and that is wrong. Yeah. But then I would go buy that book. I want to see what's in that book, and so now I have a bookshelf full of all these books, and I try to study them and glean what I can understand and see how it shows up on the mat and in life, like you said. I think my point to all that was like, so as your practice, your physical asana practice, advances through life, through a lifetime of practice, because our bodies are going to age. It seems to me that as the body reaches a point where, I don't know, does your practice start to kind of go backwards a little bit? You're so at the, in the youth of life, but I think about it, if the physical practice is sustainable for a lifetime, when you're 70, when you're 80, it's going to look different than when you're 40 or 50, I would think.
That's a funny story, if I can quote Pattabhi Jois. She has a fun story from one of the conferences where some student asks them, and they say, Pattabhi Jois, you tell us to do practice every day and all this comment, but what about you? Are you doing your practice? And Pattabhi Jois, he says, yes. And the girl, she's looking at this fat man that's sitting up there and like staggers around. He's in his 90s, right? And he's like, she's not really believing it, right? So she's like, you do your practice every day? He's like, yes. And there's a little pause, and she says, you do primary series every day? And he leans forward in the chair, and he looks at her as if, like, slightly annoyed, and as if she's absolutely crazy. And she says, I am 90. 90. Then he went on to the next question. And I think what happened that day was that this young girl who asked a honest question, they didn't disconnect, because when she said, when Pattabhi Jois said practice, and she thought practice, she thought primary series. Mm-hmm. And when Pattabhi Jois says practice, he says abhyasa. He says the effort we put into steadying the mind. Mm-hmm. And tapas. And he would wake up early every day, and he would do japa, and he would do prayer and so forth. And in classic yoga, as I'm sure you would agree, that is considered practice. Mm-hmm. That is the equivalent to practice. You can do pranayama, you can do meditation, you can do recitation of prayers or mantras, you can do asana practice, and it's really up to us. So he continued, in that way. And in some way, I like the way that you're working. You say you advance in your practice, and can we advance even beyond age? And I'm 54, and I'm definitely feeling, the years pile on there. No doubt about it. But I feel that there is a subtler practice that begins to be more interesting. For instance, just to make it through primary series with a short breath and a strong pace, and to do all the asanas is not really what I'm interested in. What I personally feel is interesting, and maybe you would agree, coming from your meditative practice, is that it is that subtlety. It's that, as Goyenka calls it in the Vipassana tradition, he says this softness. That there's this very soft, subtle, delicate point inside that we are trying to maintain, and that we're not trying to harden up and stiffen up with. Mm. And I think that is what I consider Patanjali's idea of steadiness. That's when we have reached that soft, joyful, calm, quiet, undisturbed, unstruggling, softness, if I may, inside while we are doing our practice. I think I'm going for that rather than, you know what I mean? So and I feel like better at that every year. Mm-hmm. And I also get a little bit better at, I don't really care if I don't jump back. Mm-hmm. Where, like, if you took me 10 years ago and I didn't jump back, and that would be like a little devil up here going like, oh, you're a bad person, Tim. Oh, what did you not jump back? And then I do the rest of my practice, and I throw half another practice on top of that. And still, when I came out of my practice after, I was like, ooh, I didn't jump back between Marjasana C and D. So I feel like that's one of the corners that I've been grinding down, just a little bit more kind.
Yeah. Stop creating our own suffering.
Exactly. And also, when I have, that's a little, blah. You said it much better. Stop creating our own suffering. Let's stick with that. Good one. It's like refreshing to hear. And it's why, I was excited to get you on the schedule at Cityoga, because I'm like, oh, this guy, he has depth to his practice in a lot of different ways. So I thought that was pretty cool. And now, just getting to know you through this conversation, I'm even more excited to, awesome.
Get you out here and to get in the intensive that's coming up, whatever dates I sign, it's on my calendar.
I will find you.
Do you have, is there anything else you want to touch on before we wrap up? That any thoughts or any stories or any experience you want to share with?
No, I think that, hey, I'm Dukkha Managatam, that like stop the pain before it's coming. Stop creating your own struggling. I think that's pretty dang perfect way to end this conversation.
Well, very good. Well, and oh man, we've been talking for a while, so I thank you for like indulging me in this time. And
time flies in good company.
It does. So for our listeners out there, I will definitely add to the podcast notes information on where to find Tim and what he's up to. So we'll have, you can find him on Instagram and Facebook, and his Tim Feldmann yoga and Miami Life Center, and then it's got the schedule and all those fun things. And yeah, Tim, so it's been a great pleasure to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Likewise.
Thank you for listening to The Yoga Voice, brought to you by Cityoga School of Yoga and Health, where we are committed to exploring how yoga inspires and transforms. Find out more at www.cityoga.biz. That's CITYOGA.biz. Special thanks to our producer, Brian Sims, for his audio expertise.